significant information, new vision, perfect direction, and logical analysis. Anatoly Media. Colonialism, the sea gate, and Ethiopia. Just as a person cannot survive without breathing, a country without access to seaport is like a person suffocating in danger of existential collapse. What is tragic is that Ethiopia, our country, was once a strong and blessed land with enviable access to sea, more so than many other countries. However, following the implementation of European Scramble for Africa project, Ethiopia's power and independence were deliberately undermined. The sea gate, which served as Ethiopia's economic and strategic lifeline, was blocked and taken away as part of a coordinated colonial strategy by the European invaders. The sea gate, which served as Ethiopia's economic and strategic lifeline, was blocked and taken away as a part of coordinated colonial strategy by European invaders. They systematically encircled and landlocked Ethiopia. Though the colonial powers, particularly the British, French, and Italians, were unable to fully colonize and govern Ethiopia, they still collaborated with Egypt and other colonial territories to suffocate her access to sea and thereby cripple her economically. Their aim was to prevent Ethiopia from developing independently. At the time, the British, who governed Egypt as a colony, saw the Blue Nile as essential to Egypt's agricultural production, especially for their colonial interests. Therefore, they ensured that Ethiopia, the source of the Nile, would not allowed to control or even use a drop of it. They established colonial policies and enforced mechanisms that blocked Ethiopia's access to international water, aiming to render her economically weak and dependent. Egypt followed this same approach, created bandit movement of the Eritrean People's Liberation Front, EPLF, to obstruct Ethiopia's coastal access. With British support, they turned the bandit into a weaponized strategy to execute their policy of landlocking Ethiopia. These powers, even after the end of direct colonial rule, managed to maintain the isolation of Ethiopia by continuing to control her sea access through proxies and artificial borders. The effects of these colonial era policies are still felt today. So what did Ethiopia's sea access look like before colonialism? Most Ethiopians today were born after Ethiopia had already been landlocked. Very few now or understand that Ethiopia once had a coastal line and vibrant ports. The generation that witnessed it firsthand has passed, and the current generation only knows a reality shaped by post-colonial boundaries. Ethiopia, the only African nation never to be colonized in the full sense, is ironically the only country that still lives under the lasting impact of colonialism, particularly in being denied sea access. People often say Ethiopia was never colonized, but that is only partially true. While the country itself was not occupied and ruled like other colonies, it was still subject to colonial maps, policies, and pressures that resulted in the loss of its seaports. In that sense, Ethiopia is the only African country that remains to this day trapped in a colonial setup, it never fully escaped. European powers may not have ruled Ethiopia directly, but they did occupy its coastlines, carving them off and administrating them as separate colonies. The Italians took Eritrea, the French took Djibouti, and the British took over Hargeisa, which means now part of Somaliland. All were once under Ethiopian territory or claim, and all were detached through various colonial strategies. The ultimate goal of any colonial power is to dominate the economy of the land it targets. Even though the European did not directly govern Ethiopia, by controlling her ports, they ensured she remained poor, dependent, and excluded from international trade. By dominating Ethiopia's import and export rights, they turned her into a nation that had to pay to use her own natural trade rights that once belonged to her. The colonial legacy meant that Ethiopia became landlocked, economically isolated, and politically dependent. Moreover, under the pretext of military strategy and communication line, colonial forces, especially the British, pushed Ethiopia out of her coastal areas. From Kenya to Eritrea, they created a 40-kilometer wide buffer zone under colonial rule, effectively cutting Ethiopia off from the sea. Through they did not occupy the capital city Addis Ababa Finfinne, but the colonial powers, they could effectively control Ethiopia's economic destiny by dominating her ports, the key to growth, independence, and trade. This gave them all the benefits of colonization without having to maintain a military presence in the capital. So, if you can control a country's economy, you don't need to control it militarily. That is the hidden truth of how Ethiopia was colonized in all but name, by the sea, through the sea, and by being denied the sea. Then, countries that had been under colonial rule managed to gain their independence due to the struggles they waged and the improvement of international laws. Today, they govern their nations freely. However, Ethiopia, which was the only country successfully resist military invasion, now appears to be landlocked and trapped in a geopolitical blockade despite its historical resistance. The same colonial powers who once dominated others now exploit their economic superiority by organizing political parties on one hand and supporting military corps on the other, establishing a network of proxy in African governments while sitting comfortably in Europe, in particular regarding resource extraction. The political manipulation and conflicts occurring in former French colonies in West Africa can be seen as a deliberate strategy. Upper Volta's Thomas Sankara is a significant example in this context. On the other hand, despite the fact that some people, due to their ignorance and the lack of awareness, have voluntarily submitted themselves to subjugation and continue to suffer with their former colonizers, most African countries have gained independence. Ethiopia's truth, however, stands apart from them all. Ultimately, Europeans have made Ethiopia their laughingstock, turning it into a cautionary tale. Despite the sacrifice made, Ethiopia now finds itself in a paradoxical state. Number 1. The coastal gateway that European powers denied Ethiopian access to the sea through manipulations is now being utilized primarily by China as a hub of its growing power, as a gateway to Africa, and for disseminating its products to other continents, not for Europe. This illustrates the contradiction in the West's policies, and they would rather lose Africa than see China dominate. So now is the right time for Ethiopia to awaken and restore what was lost. Number 2. The region has become hub for terrorism, pirates of Houthi, Al-Shabaab, and other militant groups. As such, it is no longer a safe passage for European naval and commercial ships. Therefore, securing Ethiopia's territorial access to the sea is a necessary strategic and military solution. Ethiopia recognizes this, strengthening its military to prepare accordingly. This must be accelerated. Number 3. When Europe colonized Africa, it directly controlled the governments of most African nations. But Ethiopia's administration was never dismantled. However, to preserve that central government, Ethiopia sacrificed its access to sea. To save the central government, sea access was bartered away for foreigners. As a result, vital economic and developmental opportunities were handed over to former colonial power. What worsened the situation was the post-World War II shift. European economy collapsed due to war, and African liberation struggles gained momentum. As African countries began to gain independence, Ethiopia's coastal territories, once part of its own sovereign land, were not returned. Emperor Haile Selassie's struggle for Ethiopian territory was replaced by Egyptian manipulation through Eritrean People's Liberation Front, and today Ethiopia is left without any coastal access. This means the coastal territories that were once part of Ethiopia, now identifying as separate nations, have effectively downgraded Ethiopia into a landlocked country. As long as Ethiopia is denied access to its own coastal line, claiming it is a free and independent country is hollow. Its economic and developmental prospectus remains under indirect colonial control. Given the current reality, it can be said that Ethiopia is still under neo-colonial rule. This generation cannot accept such a fate. For Ethiopia to truly claim independence from colonial rule, it must regain unrestricted access to its own coastal ports naturally, freely, and without needing anyone's permission. And even Egypt, which prostituted and cooperated with so many colonial powers, has secured its freedom. But Ethiopia, without any colonial experience and having resisted foreign domination, is now incapable of ensuring its own economic freedom. This is a profound injustice. Now here is the question. Ethiopia, the only African country never colonized, or the only one still not free from neo-colonialism today? The truth lies in the connection between colonialism, coastal access, and Ethiopia. Ethiopia, a country now at risk of disintegration due to internal strife among its children, must unify its people and take necessary measures for survival. We all should have to give priority for access to sea. The right time to act is now. Our Adwa is Assad. Significant information, new vision, perfect direction, and logical analysis. Anatoly Media.